It begins not in the deserts of Scripture, nor in the silent ruins of forgotten cities, but in the deeper desert, the one within the human soul, where memory and myth intertwine. There, beneath the shifting sands of millennia, a name stirs. The Watchers? To most, they are only shadows flickering in the apocryphal book of Enoch, but to those who walk the narrow path of hidden knowledge, they are far more. They are the whispering architects of a pivotal fracture in humanity's destiny. The ancient seers tell us that in the first age, before the floodwaters erased the blueprint of the old world, the heavens were not silent. Celestial beings, luminous, terrible, and wise, beheld the world of men. They were known as the Grigori, the Watchers. From their vantage among the spheres, they were tasked to observe, to guard, and to record the unfolding of mortal history. Like scribes inscribing the dream of the Creator upon the cosmic tablets. Yet in time their gaze shifted from duty to desire. The beauty of the daughters of earth, the raw untamed fire of human spirit, awakened in them a longing that neither heaven's discipline nor cosmic law could quench. In the night, when the constellations traced the same geometry as in the hour of their descent, they came down, not as the divine messengers of legend, but as exiles from their own order. The book of Enoch speaks their names like a litany of forbidden stars: Semyaza, the leader; Azazel, the great revealer, and many others whose syllables still tremble in the secret rites of certain occult brotherhoods. These were not mere angels, but luminous intelligences clothed in subtle matter, walking among men as kings, teachers, and, in the eyes of some gods, they brought gifts, or perhaps poisons, depending on who tells the tale. They taught the forging of metal, the working of precious stones, the reading of omens in the stars, the art of enchantments, and the weaving of shadows through words. The women they took bore children unlike any before, the Nephilim, giants, in stature and in mind, beings who straddled the threshold between earth and sky. Some say these hybrid offspring built the Cyclopean temples whose ruins we still find aligned with the solstices and the equinoxes. Others whisper they were the very tyrants whose hubris summoned the deluge. Yet behind the myth lies an older pattern, one the Hermetic philosophers recognized: the descent of the higher into the lower, the mingling of spirit with matter, the alchemical coniantio oppositorum. In this, the Watchers were not only rebels, they were mirrors, reflecting the secret yearning of the human soul to unite with the divine, to break the seal of separation. But such unions come at a price, and as the ages turned, their teachings spread like wildfire through the cradle of civilization, reshaping the destinies of tribes and kingdoms. What began as illumination soon grew into a shadow too vast to ignore, drawing the gaze of the highest heavens and setting in motion a reckoning that would change the face of the earth. The desert wind still carries the echo of that first transgression, and to follow it further, we must pass from the realm of poetic whispers into the forbidden archives of the ancients, where the Watcher's story takes on a far darker hue. The chronicles that survive in fragments, on cracked tablets, in weathered manuscripts, and in the murmurs of mystics, agree on one truth: the descent of the Watchers was not merely a lapse in celestial discipline. It was an act that tore at the very weave of cosmic order, for in choosing the realm of flesh over the purity of spirit, they crossed a threshold from which there was no return. It is said that when their deeds reached the throne, a tremor moved through the heavens. The divine law, inscribed not in ink but in the harmonics of the spheres, had been violated. The Watchers were no longer sentinels of the eternal plan. They had become participants in the drama they were meant only to observe. To the unseen hierarchy of light, this was not a small transgression, but a wound in the architecture of creation itself. Enoch, the righteous scribe, was summoned into visions that burned his mind yet left his body unscathed. He was shown the assembly of the Most High, the thrones encircled by fire, and the judgment pronounced against the Grigori, Semyaza and his brethren, once clothed in radiance. were now to be bound beneath the mountains, some say beneath Ararat, others beneath the deeper ranges whose names are lost to history. They were chained in darkness, their cries echoing in caverns where no mortal sun has ever shone. But it was Azazel who bore the heaviest curse, in the oldest versions of the tale. He was not merely imprisoned, he was made the scapegoat of all their sins, the arts he had given to mankind, the forging of weapons, the crafting of ornaments that turned vanity into worship, the enchantments that could bend another's will, were now named as the root of human corruption. The heavenly decree ordered that every trace of his teaching be erased. Yet history tells us that the knowledge was never truly destroyed. It seeped into secret initiations, into the guarded libraries of Egypt and Sumer, into the whispered formulas of wandering magi. The punishment was not only for the watchers. Their children, the Nephilim, were hunted by the will of heaven, storms, earthquakes, and finally, the great inundation rose against them. The flood, in this telling, was not a mere cleansing of moral decay. It was a surgical excision of a hybrid lineage that had altered the balance between worlds. The waters erased their cities, their monuments, and their histories, yet certain artifacts still survive, locked beneath layers of silt and stone, waiting for those with the eyes to read their geometry. And here lies the paradox. The watchers were condemned, yet their gifts remain the foundation of many of humanity's greatest achievements. In the Hermetic mirror, their story is the fall of spirit into matter, the imprisonment of the divine spark within the labyrinth of the material world. But also, in the same mirror, it is the story of initiation, for the seeker must descend into shadow before finding the hidden path back to the light. The exiled watchers did not vanish entirely. Across ages, certain sects and brotherhoods claimed to speak with them still, not through the tongue but through dream trance and symbol, and some say their council shaped empires from behind the veil, guiding kings and architects to raise monuments that aligned with the heavens as they once did in the age before the flood. Yet to understand how their forbidden legacy could endure for millennia, we must follow the trail of symbols they left scattered through time in stones and myths, in the very stars themselves. When the floodwaters receded and the earth was cleansed, it seemed to mortalize that the watchers were gone, their palaces swallowed, their names forgotten. Yet their presence lingered in subtler form, woven into the symbolic language of the ancients. They no longer walked openly among men, but they whispered through architecture, myth, and star map, encoding their memory for those able to read the signs. In the deserts of Mesopotamia, the ziggurats rose like frozen mountains, not merely temples, but stairways for the soul, each tier echoing the celestial layers from which the watchers once descended. Their measurements mirrored the paths of certain stars, and their summits aligned with constellations that, in the days before the flood, were the stations of the Grigori. The priests who served in these structures guarded a double tradition: the public rites to their gods, and the secret, inherited wisdom of the sky teachers who had vanished into shadow. Far to the west, in Egypt, that same stellar geometry appeared in the alignment of the pyramids with Orion's belt, a configuration the Hermetic adepts believed marked the gate to a higher realm. The myths of Osiris's dismemberment and resurrection conceal another layer: the scattering of divine knowledge by the Watcher's fall, and its reassembly through the work of initiates. In the hieroglyphic art, certain winged beings, neither human nor fully divine, stretch their arms over the pharaoh, as if in silent remembrance of the ancient pact between heaven and earth. Even across the ocean, in lands where no submarine clay tablets should have reached, the pattern reemerged. The temple cities of the Maya and the great platforms of the Andean highlands preserved the same obsessions: solar gates, lunar calendars, precise equinox alignments. Were these merely coincidental human inventions, or were they the last flickers of a global memory, a memory seeded by those who once walked between the stars and the earth? Among the watchers of symbols, one truth becomes clear: the language they left was never meant for the many. It was a cipher addressed to the few, to the seekers willing to pass through layers of myth, religion, and superstition to glimpse the original fire. Their code is written in proportions: the golden ratio in temple facadas, the 72-fold divisions of sacred circles, the recurrent number 33 in the heights of ziggurats, and the degrees of initiation. Each is a thread leading back to the same forbidden source. Yet the Watcher's legacy was not only in stone and star. It lived in stories: the titans chained beneath the earth, the gods punished for loving mortals, the bringers of fire who suffered for their gift. These were not merely tales to entertain, they were encrypted histories, reframed again and again to survive the censor's hand and the amnesia of ages. In time, certain occult orders claimed to have deciphered this inheritance. In candlelit chambers, initiates traced the same stellar paths the Watchers once followed. In secret rituals, they invoked the luminous ones not as fallen rebels, but as the first masters of the mysteries, whose fall was the price of bringing the light of heaven into the clay of man. But to truly measure the depth of their influence, we must descend further into the realm where their knowledge became more than a memory, where it began to reshape the inner architecture of the human mind itself. In the centuries that followed their exile, the Watchers no longer walked in the open, yet the essence of their teachings, fragments of celestial mathematics, laws of vibration, and the arcane mechanics of the soul, persisted in whispers. These fragments passed from mouth to ear, from master to initiate, until they became the seeds of what we now call the secret sciences. It was said that the Grigori understood the soul as a living architecture, a temple more intricate than any ziggurat or pyramid. They taught that the human being was a bridge between worlds, a vessel of both clay and starlight, capable of ascending through invisible spheres if the right keys were known. These keys were not physical, they were harmonic patterns, sacred syllables, and mental symbols that could unlock dormant faculties. Among the earliest inheritors of this knowledge were the priest-kings of Sumer and Akkad, who practiced dream incubation in shadowed sanctuaries. Seeking visions from the same astral planes the Watchers once traversed freely. In Egypt, the doctrine of the Ba and Ka mirrored the Watchers' dual understanding of the self, the mortal essence bound to earth, and the luminous double that could navigate the realms beyond death. As their lore diffused through time, it became the skeleton of many mystical systems: the Hebrew Merkava sent through heavenly palaces, the Greek teaching of the soul's journey through planetary spheres, the Persian mystic stairways of light. The Hermetic adepts recognized in these scattered traditions the fingerprints of the same original revelation, a primal gnosis carried into exile along with its givers. Yet such wisdom could not remain pure in the hands of men. Like molten metal cooling in clay molds, it took on the shape of human ambition, superstition, and desire for power. Alchemy, in its earliest sense, was not the transmutation of base metals, but the transformation of the soul from leaden ignorance to golden illumination. Over the centuries, the metaphor hardened into literal metallurgy, and the true inner work was concealed beneath layers of chemical secrecy. The Watchers had warned, so the legend says, that the gifts they gave were double-edged. A symbol could become a talisman of awakening or a weapon of control. A word of power could heal the sick or bend a city to the will of one man. In this, the Hermetic maxim was fulfilled: all things are double, and with each blessing comes its shadow. By the time of the classical world, their influence had become almost untraceable, woven into Pythagoras' numerical harmonies, into Plato's theory of forms, into the oracle's cryptic utterances. The outer history spoke only of philosophers and priests. The inner history knew that these were inheritors of a flame first lit by beings who had watched the birth of the stars. But their presence was never entirely benevolent, for in the labyrinth of the mind, some doors were not meant to be opened by mortal hands. And there are grim tales, scattered in apocrypha and heretical scrolls, of those who sought to use the Watcher's keys, and instead unleashed visions that drove them to madness. Still, the chain of transmission endured, and as the age of empires began, the Watcher's hidden current would flow into the veins of secret societies, shaping the destiny of kingdoms while remaining invisible to history's gaze. As empires rose from the dust of the ancient world, the legacy of the Watchers seeped into the marrow of power. Not openly, no king proclaimed himself a disciple of the Grigori, but through the veiled hands of orders, cults, and brotherhoods who kept the old flame alive behind walls of initiation. In Babylon, where ziggurats climbed into the dust-hazed sky, the Chaldean Magi guarded star charts said to be descended from the Watcher's own celestial atlases. These were not mere calendars for harvest and festival, but maps of influence, diagrams showing when certain planetary alignments could thin the veil between worlds. It was whispered that the Magi could read the destiny of empires in the slow procession of constellations, and that those who ruled listened closely to their counsel. In Egypt, the priesthood of Thoth became the custodians of another branch of this inheritance. Thoth, scribe of the gods, was said to have recorded the very words of the Watchers in books written before the flood, texts that were hidden when the waters rose, only to be recovered in later dynasties. Within the shadowed halls of Karnak and Luxor, initiates were led through rituals that mirrored the descent and return of the Grigori. The neophyte entered darkness, received the sacred names, and emerged into the simulated sunrise as one reborn. Even in the Hellenistic world, when Greek reason began to cloak myth in philosophy, the thread continued. The mysteries of Eleusis spoke of divine beings descending to earth, bringing both a gift and a burden. The Orphic hymns hinted at a primal fall from the stars and the need for the soul to remember its true origin. The uninitiated heard pastoral tales of gods and maidens. The initiated heard the echo of the Watcher's transgression. These orders did not merely preserve knowledge, they wielded it. The architects of temples and palaces embedded stellar alignments into their foundations, believing that structures tuned to the heavens could act as conduits for unseen forces. Rulers crowned in such sanctuaries became, in the eyes of the people, divinely sanctioned. In truth, their coronations were often timed and orchestrated by the keepers of the Watcher's calendar. Some orders remained loyal to the spirit of the old teachers, using their knowledge to elevate the consciousness of those deemed worthy. Others fell into the trap the Watchers themselves had warned against, using sacred signs to consolidate worldly power, to manipulate the masses through spectacle, fear, and prophecy. In the Hermetic axiom, the same key that opens the gates of light can also unlock the abyss. But the greatest secret of these brotherhoods was not in the architecture or the rituals. It was in the preservation of a prophecy. For the story of the Watchers, they taught, was not finished. The chains that bound them beneath the mountains were not eternal. A time would come when the alignments would return, when the ancient gates would open, and the luminous ones would walk once more upon the earth. And so the orders waited. They built, they plotted, they guided kingdoms like pieces on a cosmic chessboard, all in preparation for a return they believed inevitable. But to trace that prophecy's journey through time, we must follow it into the age when faith fractured into competing creeds, and the Watchers were recast as demons in one book, angels in another, and cosmic saviors in the hidden scrolls. As the ancient empires waned and new faiths swept across their ruins, the memory of the Watchers entered an age of masks. The rise of monotheistic religions brought not only new temples and doctrines, but a fierce struggle over the authorship of the human story, and in that struggle, the Grigori became contested territory. In the scrolls kept by the early Hebrews, the Watchers were already a paradox, beings both radiant and condemned, teachers and transgressors. The Book of Enoch preserved their tale in rich, haunting detail. but it was pushed to the margins of canon, deemed too dangerous, too revealing. Its visions of celestial councils and imprisoned angels survived only in hidden communities, these Essenes by the Dead Sea, whose own writings hint at secret battles between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. To them, Watcher's fall was not merely history, but a cosmic pattern still playing out in their own time. When the early Christian movement emerged, it inherited this tension in some strands of thought. The Watchers were demonized outright, their knowledge recast as sorcery, their offspring as the monstrous enemies of God. Yet in the cryptic writings of the Gnostics, another version flourished. Here the Watchers were the archons of a higher realm, whose descent brought fragments of the divine light into the prison of matter. To the Orthodox, such ideas were heresy. To the initiate, they were a key to decoding Scripture's deeper layers. In Islam's sacred tradition, the tale was reborn in the story of Harut and Marut, two angels who descended to Babylon to test humanity, teaching them magic, but warning them that such knowledge came with a price. This warning was the same refrain that had echoed since the dawn of the Watchers' exile. In the Persian mystical schools, too, the fallen yet luminous figures reappeared, clothed in the language of Sufi allegory, where they became symbols of the soul's yearning for the beloved, even at the cost of divine disobedience. Across these shifting landscapes, one truth persisted: the Watchers could never be erased, only reinterpreted. Each new faith, each new empire, shaped their image to fit its own cosmology and political needs. In public sermons, they were cautionary tales, heavenly beings brought low by lust or pride. In the cloisters of the mystics, they remained guides, dangerous but indispensable, to the deeper realms of the spirit. The battle for their legacy was not fought with swords, but with manuscripts, translations, and the suppression of certain texts. Libraries burned, scrolls vanished into the vaults of monasteries, and oral traditions became the last refuge for the old stories. The Grigori lived on in fragments, a line in a song, a strange fresco in a rural chapel, a whispered legend in the market square, and yet, even hidden behind veils of theology and myth, their current continued to flow. It moved like an underground river, feeding the roots of mystical schools from Ethiopia to Byzantium, from the deserts of Arabia to the high mountains of Europe. This river would surface again in the secret manuscripts of alchemists, in the star maps of Renaissance magi, and in the silent rituals of orders who claimed descent from the first Watchers of the sky. To follow them into that rebirth, we must step into the twilight of the Middle Ages, when the Watchers' knowledge began to merge with the rediscovery of ancient science, and the fires of the occult revival were kindled anew. The late Middle Ages and the dawn of the Renaissance marked a strange turning in the wheel of time, a season when forgotten books surfaced like relics from a vanished shore, and with them, the hidden current of the Watchers' legacy rose once more into the light. It began with the retrieval of ancient manuscripts from the libraries of the East, carried into Europe by scholars, merchants, and, some whisper, by agents of secret fraternities who had guarded them for centuries. Among the recovered treasures were Hermetic texts, Chaldean oracles, and obscure astrological treatises whose roots reached far deeper than Greece or Rome. Back, it was said, to the celestial, or first whispered by the Grigori. In Florence, the court of Cosimo de' Medici became a crucible for this revival. The philosopher Marsilio Ficino translated the Corpus Hermeticum, claiming it was the voice of Hermes Trismegistus, the sane Thoth of Egypt, whose own wisdom was linked to the pre-flood knowledge of the Watchers. These writings spoke of man as a microcosm of the cosmos, a mirror of the divine order, the very teaching that the Grigori were said to have impressed upon humanity before their fall. Alchemy, too, experienced a transformation in this age. No longer just the art of transmuting metals, it became an elaborate symbolic system for the purification of the soul, echoing the original, esoteric intent of the Watchers' forbidden science. The alchemical marriage of sun and moon, sulfur and mercury, mirrored the ancient Hermetic principle of the union between heaven and earth, the same union the Grigori themselves embodied in their descent. Astrology, once condemned as superstition, re-emerged as a noble art. Court astrologers advised kings on matters of war and alliance, their charts tracing planetary patterns, not merely as omens, but as echoes of the celestial harmonics known to the watchers. Even architecture became an esoteric act. Cathedrals and palaces were built according to sacred proportions, their spires aligned with solstices, their rose windows embedding geometries as old as the Mesopotamian sky-gazers. But it was within the more secretive circles, the Rosicrucians, the shadowed orders of alchemists and magi, that the Watcher's name was spoken again with something like reverence. These initiates believed themselves heirs to a chain of wisdom stretching back before the flood, a chain forged by luminous intelligences who had once walked in the flesh. In their manifestos and coded symbols, the Grigori were hinted at as the first brothers, keepers of the original covenant between men and the heavens. The Renaissance was not without its dangers. The Inquisition, ever vigilant against heresy, saw in these resurgent mysteries the specter of old paganism and demonic influence. Some claimed, perhaps not without cause, that the Watchers, fire once rekindled, could burn beyond control. Books were banned, authors silenced, and many adepts veiled their teachings in allegory to avoid the fate of those accused of witchcraft or sorcery. Still, the current could not be extinguished. By the dawn of the Enlightenment, the Watcher's legacy had threaded itself into the very fabric of Western esotericism, shaping the philosophies of secret lodges, the symbolism of Masonic rites, and the quiet convictions of those who believed that humanity's destiny lay in regaining the lost knowledge of the stars. And yet, beneath all the revival and romance, the prophecy endured, that the Watcher's exile was not eternal, that one day the celestial gates would open again. As the modern age approached, the prophecy began to be reinterpreted, no longer only as a return of beings from the heavens, but as a transformation within humanity itself, a reawakening of the same fire they had once carried down from the heights. To arrive at this final revelation, we must step into the last part of our journey, where myth, prophecy, and the seeker's own soul converge, and the true meaning of the Watchers is unveiled. The trail of the Watchers, from the dawn of the First Age to the Renaissance salons, is a labyrinth, but all labyrinths have a center, and here in the quiet chambers of the modern seeker's soul, their story finds its true shape. For while scholars chase the Watchers across timelines and archaeologists sift their traces from stone, the deeper tradition whispers that their exile was never only a matter of chains beneath mountains. It was also a descent into the heart of humanity itself. Their wisdom, star-born, dangerous, and luminous, was not lost in the flood, nor fully hidden in temples or secret books. It was planted in the human mind, sealed within the very architecture of consciousness, waiting for the one who could find the key. This is the hidden layer beneath the prophecy. The return of the Watchers may not mean a literal reappearance of celestial beings walking among us, but the reawakening of their light within humanity. Every temple aligned to the stars, every myth of a god's fall and resurrection, every geometric symbol carved in stone, all were not only memorials to the past, but mirrors held up to the seeker, urging them to remember their own descent from the heights of spirit into the realm of matter. The Hermetic philosophers said, "As above, so below, as within, so without." In this maxim, the Watcher's entire saga can be read. Their fall reflects the spirit's own choice to incarnate, to know the density of clay and the burden of mortality. Their punishment mirrors the human soul's long exile in a world that often feels alien to its true nature. And their enduring legacy, the symbols, the sciences, the secret orders, is the map home, concealed in plain sight. Some mystics claim that to awaken this inner Watcher is to reclaim the original covenant, to unite the wisdom of the heavens, with the compassion born of walking in the dust. In this vision, the chains are nothing more than the limitations of unawakened perception, and the mountains beneath which they are bound are the layers of forgetfulness in the human heart. Yet there are others, adepts who peer deeper into the abyss, who warn that the prophecy has a double edge, for just as the light of the watchers can rise within the soul, so too can their shadow. The same fire that illuminates can consume. The same knowledge that liberates can enslave. This is the eternal tension of their gift, the reason it was once called forbidden. And so the seeker stands at the threshold, holding the same choice that faced the Grigori in the first age, to remain a passive observer of the world or to descend fully into it, risking the fall in pursuit of the union of heaven and earth. In the end, the Watchers may be less a chapter of ancient history than an archetype, a living pattern that moves through empires, religions, and the human psyche itself. To encounter them is to stand in the place where myth and memory merge, where the dust of old worlds mingles with the starlight of new ones yet to be born. And perhaps, when the constellations align as they once did in the hour of their descent, those who have awakened the Watcher within will hear the call, not from the mountains or the sky, but from the depths of their own being, and will remember what was always theirs, the knowledge of the path that bridges the worlds.